As a retired military officer, I thought I had instilled the values of discipline, respect, and integrity in my family. But when my grandson, manipulated by his mother, started demanding money and mocking my life's principles, I knew I had to take a stand. Using the same strategic precision that had served me in the army, I devised a plan to protect my estate and teach my grandson the true meaning of respect. This is the story of how I fought back against entitlement and greed, and proved that the battles of life are won not with force, but with unwavering courage and unshakable values. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The day started like any other, with the rising sun casting a golden glow across the meticulously maintained lawn of my suburban home. I stood on the porch, sipping my morning coffee and savoring the crisp autumn air, as I had done every day since my retirement from the military nearly a decade ago. At 69 years old, I was no longer the strapping young soldier I had once been, but I still carried myself with the same discipline and pride that had defined my 30-year career in the Army. My posture was ramrod straight, my gaze sharp and alert, my mind as keen as ever. As I surveyed the quiet street before me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction and contentment. This was the life I'd worked so hard to build, the reward for decades of service and sacrifice. A comfortable home, a loving family, the respect and admiration of my community. These were the things that mattered most to me, the true measures of success. But, even as I savored the peace and tranquility of the moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, that there was a storm gathering on the horizon that threatened to upend everything I held dear. And then, as if on cue, I heard the sound of tires screeching in the driveway, followed by the slamming of a car door and the pounding of footsteps on the pavement. I turned just in time to see my grandson, Jake, striding towards me with a look of anger and frustration on his face. At 22 years old, Jake was the spitting image of his father, my son Michael, who had tragically passed away in a car accident when Jake was just a toddler. He had the same sharp features and piercing blue eyes, the same quick wit and charming smile. But where Michael had been a man of integrity and honor, a true patriot who had followed in my footsteps and served his country with distinction, Jake had grown up spoiled and entitled, coddled by his mother and indulged by a world that seemed to cater to his every whim. As he approached the porch, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the clenched jaw and balled fists that spoke of barely contained rage. I braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming, the latest in a long line of clashes that had defined our relationship in recent years. "Grandpa," he said, his voice tight with anger, "we need to talk." I nodded calmly, gesturing for him to join me on the porch. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" He paced back and forth, his hands running through his hair in agitation. "It's Mom," he said finally, his voice quirking with emotion. "She's cutting me off, saying I need to start taking responsibility for my own life. Can you believe that?" I sighed inwardly, knowing all too well the enabling and overindulgence that had characterized my daughter-in-law's parenting style. Samantha had been a good wife to Michael, but in the wake of his death, she had poured all her grief and love into Jake, creating a dynamic that was as unhealthy as it was unsustainable. "I can understand your frustration, Jake," I said, carefully. "But your mother may have a point. You're a grown man now, and it's important to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. He wheeled on me, his eyes flashing with indignation. "That's easy for you to say, isn't it? You with your military pension and your paid-off mortgage and your perfect little life. You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to have to fight for everything you have." I felt a flicker of anger at his words, a hint of the steely resolve that had served me so well in the heat of battle. But I pushed it down, reminding myself that this was my grandson. The boy I had bounced on my knee and taught to throw a football. The young man who carried the legacy of my son in his very DNA. "You're right, Jake," I said evenly. "I have been fortunate in many ways. But that fortune was not handed to me on a silver platter. It was earned through hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. The same values that your father embodied. The same principles that have guided our family for generations." He scoffed, rolling his eyes in a gesture of teenage rebellion that seemed oddly out of place on his adult face. "Spare me the lecture, Grandpa. I didn't come here for a history lesson. I came here because I need money, and I need it now." I raised an eyebrow, a sense of unease settling in the pit of my stomach. "Money? For what, exactly?" He shrugged, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "Just some stuff I need to take care of. Bills. Mostly. And maybe a little seed money for a business idea I've been working on." I studied him carefully, searching for the truth behind the bravado and the bluster. I had heard this pitch before. The vague promises and grandiose plans that always seemed to end in disappointment and debt. "Jake," I said firmly, "I'm afraid I can't help you. Not like this. Not without a clear plan and a commitment to changing your ways." His face darkened, a mask of anger and resentment settling over his features. "I should have known," he spat bitterly. "You're just like her, always judging me, always holding me back. Well, guess what, Grandpa? I don't need your approval, and I damn sure don't need your money." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off the porch, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the still morning air. I watched him go, a sense of sadness and regret washing over me like a tide. But beneath the sorrow, I could feel a flicker of something else, a spark of determination and resolve that had been forged in the crucible of combat and hardened by the trials of life. I knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be more battles to come in the war for my grandson's soul. But I also knew that I would not yield, would not surrender to the forces of entitlement and greed that threatened to tear our family apart. For I was Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who had stared down the face of death and emerged unbroken and unafraid. And I would not rest until I had taught my grandson the true meaning of respect, until I had shown him the path to a life of honor and integrity. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard I had to fight, I would not fail in this mission. For it was the most important battle of my life, the one that would determine the legacy I left behind and the future of the family I loved more than life itself. With a deep breath and a steely glint in my eye, I turned and walked back into the house, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same unwavering courage and unshakable resolve that had always been my guiding light. The next few weeks passed in a blur of tension and frustration. Jake's behavior grew increasingly erratic and disrespectful, his demands for money and support becoming more frequent and more aggressive with each passing day. He would show up at my house at all hours, often in the middle of the night, pounding on the door and shouting obscenities until I was forced to confront him. He would call me at work, leaving rambling, incoherent messages on my voicemail, his words slurred and his tone menacing. And through it all, I could see the hand of his mother at work, the subtle manipulations and emotional blackmail that had been her stock in trade for as long as I could remember. Samantha had always been a master of the guilt trip, the carefully crafted plea designed to tug at the heartstrings and loosen the purse strings. But I refused to be swayed, refused to give in to the pressure and the intimidation. I knew that every dollar I handed over, every concession I made, would only serve to enable Jake's destructive behavior and reinforce the sense of entitlement that had brought us to this point. And so, I stood my ground, weathering the storm of his anger and resentment with the same stoic resolve that had seen me through countless battles and campaigns. I set clear boundaries and expectations, laying out the terms of our relationship in no uncertain terms. "Jake," I said firmly, my voice steady and unwavering, "if you want my help, if you want to be a part of this family, then you need to start acting like it. That means taking responsibility for your own life, setting goals and working towards them, and treating others with the respect and dignity they deserve." He scoffed at my words, his eyes rolling in adolescent disdain. "Respect? Dignity? Give me a break, Grandpa, those are just words, empty concepts that don't mean anything in the real world." I felt a flicker of anger at his dismissiveness, a hint of the steely resolve that had always been my greatest strength. "They mean something to me, Jake. They mean everything. And if you can't understand that, if you can't find a way to live up to those values, then I'm afraid I can't be a part of your life." His face twisted in rage, his fists clenching at his sides. "Fine then. I don't need you anyway. I don't need anyone. I'll make my own way, on my own terms." With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I watched him go, my heart heavy with sadness and regret. But even as I mourned the loss of the relationship we had once shared, I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had stayed true to the principles that had always guided me. And I knew that in the end, it would be those principles that would see us through, that would light the way to a broader and better future. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I threw myself into my own life, focusing on the things that brought me joy and fulfillment. I volunteered at the local Veterans Center, sharing my experiences and my wisdom with the young men and women who had followed in my footsteps. I spent time with my other grandchildren, the ones who had been raised with love and discipline, who embodied the values of hard work and integrity that had always been the hallmark of our family. And I found solace in the simple pleasures of life: a good book, a warm cup of coffee, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But even as I savored these moments of peace and contentment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing on the horizon, that the storm I had seen gathering in Jake's eyes was far from over. And then, one day, the call came, the one I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. It was Samantha, her voice tight with anger and accusation. "Franklin," she said, her tone dripping with venom, "I hope you're happy. Jake is in trouble, real trouble this time. And it's all your fault." I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't quite shake. "What do you mean, Samantha? What kind of trouble?" She let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "The kind of trouble that lands you in jail, Franklin. The kind of trouble that ruins lives and destroys futures." I closed my eyes, my heart sinking with the weight of her words. "Tell me what happened, Samantha. Tell me everything." And so she did, her voice dripping with a mix of anger and desperation as she recounted the events of the past few days. Jake had gotten involved with some bad people, she said, some dangerous characters who had promised him easy money and a life of luxury. He had stolen from them, she said, taken what wasn't his, and fled into the night like a common criminal. And now they were coming for him, these shadowy figures with their threats and their violence, demanding payment for the debts he had incurred. I listened in silence, my mind racing with the implications of her words. I knew that I had to act, had to find a way to protect my grandson from the consequences of his own foolishness. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone, that I would need all the strength and cunning I had, honed over a lifetime of service, to see us through this crisis. "I'll take care of it, Samantha," I said finally, my voice steady and resolute. "I'll find a way to make this right. But I need you to do something for me in return." She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. "What? What do you need me to do?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. "I need you to let me handle this my way, Samantha. I need you to trust me, to follow my lead and my guidance. And most of all, I need you to stop enabling Jake's behavior, to stop giving him the money and the support that have brought us to this point." There was a long pause, a moment of tense silence that seemed to stretch out into eternity. And then, Finally, a sigh of resignation, a hint of the weariness and despair that had always lurked beneath her brittle facade. "All right, Franklin," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do as you ask. But please, bring my boy back to me. Bring him back safe and sound." I closed my eyes, my heart heavy with the weight of the promise I was about to make. "I will, Samantha. I swear it on my life. I will bring Jake home, and I will make sure that he never again strays from the path of honor and integrity." With that, I hung up the phone, my mind already racing with plans and strategies, with the cold, hard calculus of a man who had spent a lifetime waging war against the forces of chaos and darkness. I knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, that there would be battles to be fought and sacrifices to be made. But I also knew that I was ready for the challenge, that I had the strength and the courage to see us through to the other side. For I was Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. And I would be damned if I let my grandson's mistakes and my daughter-in-law's weakness destroy the legacy I had worked so hard to build. With a grim smile and a steely glint in my eye, I rose from my chair and made my way to the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead with the same unwavering resolve that had always been my North Star and my guiding light. For the mission had begun, and failure was not an option. Not now. Not ever. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and preparation. I called in every favor I had ever earned, every contact I had ever made in my long and storied career. I reached out to old friends and former colleagues, men and women who had served with me in the jungles of Vietnam and the deserts of Iraq, who understood the meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. Together, we formed a tight-knit team of experts and operatives, each bringing their own unique skills and experience to the table. There was Jack, the former Navy SEAL who had saved my life more times than I could count, and Sarah, the brilliant young hacker who could infiltrate any system and uncover any secret. There was Miguel, the streetwise detective who knew every back alley and hidden corner of the city, and Karen, the savvy negotiator who could talk her way into or out of any situation. And at the center of it all was me, the grizzled old warhorse who had seen it all and done it all, who would stop at nothing to protect the ones he loved. Our first order of business was to gather intelligence, to learn everything we could about the people who had taken Jake and the web of crime and corruption in which he had become entangled. We worked around the clock, sifting through mountains of data and chasing down every lead, piecing together a picture of a vast and shadowy underworld that stretched from the streets of our city to the highest halls of power. What we found was chilling, a labyrinth of greed and violence and betrayal that threatened to swallow us all whole. At the center of it all was a man named Darius, a ruthless and charismatic crime lord who ruled his empire with an iron fist and a silver tongue. He was the one who had taken Jake, who had lured him in with promises of easy money and a life of luxury, only to trap him in a web of debt and desperation from which there was no escape. And he was the one we would have to confront, the one we would have to defeat if we ever hoped to bring my grandson home. But even as we laid our plans and marshaled our forces, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time, that every moment we delayed was another moment that Jake slipped further and further away from us. And so, with a heavy heart and a grim determination, I made the decision to take matters into my own hands, to confront Darius directly and demand the return of my grandson. It was a risky move, a gamble that could easily backfire and put us all in even greater danger. But I knew that it was the only way, the only chance we had to cut through the lies and the manipulations and get to the heart of the matter. And so, on a cold and rainy night, I found myself standing outside the gates of Darius's compound, a sprawling mansion that gleamed like a jewel in the darkness. I was alone, armed with nothing but my wits and my courage, ready to face whatever lay ahead with the same unflinching resolve that had always been my greatest strength. As I approached the front door, I was met by a pair of burly guards, their faces hard and their eyes cold. They demanded to know my business, their hands resting on the weapons at their sides in a clear threat of violence. But I simply smiled, my voice calm and even as I spoke. "My name is Franklin Harris," I said, "and I am here to see Darius. I have a proposition for him, one that I think he'll find most intriguing." The guards hesitated, their eyes narrowing in suspicion. But something in my tone, in the steely glint of my gaze, must have convinced them that I was not a man to be trifled with. And so, with a grunt of acknowledgement, they stepped aside and allowed me to pass, leading me through the opulent halls of the mansion and into the heart of the beast. As I entered Darius's office, I was struck by the sheer opulence of my surroundings, the lush carpets and the gleaming mahogany, the priceless works of art that adorned the walls. But even more striking was the man himself, the sleek and powerful figure who sat behind the massive desk, his eyes glittering with a mix of amusement and menace. "Franklin Harris," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my voice steady and resolute as I spoke. "I think you know why I'm here, Darius. You have something that belongs to me, something that I intend to take back." He chuckled, a low and dangerous sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Ah, yes. Young Jake, the prodigal grandson, the one who thought he could play with the big boys and come out unscathed." I felt a flicker of anger at his mocking tone, a hint of the steely resolve that had always been my greatest weapon. "I'm not here to play games, Darius. I'm here to make a deal, one that will benefit us both." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in interest. "And what kind of deal would that be, old man? What could you possibly have to offer me that I don't already possess?" I smiled, a cold and humorless thing that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Information, Darius. The kind of information that could bring your whole empire crashing down around your ears." He stiffened, his jaw clenching in sudden tension. "What are you talking about, Harris? What information?" I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small flash drive and holding it up for him to see. "Everything, Darius. Every dirty secret, every backroom deal, every skeleton in your closet. It's all here. The result of months of careful investigation and infiltration." His eyes widened in shock, his face draining of color as he realized the implications of my words. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice hoarse with fear and anger. "You couldn't possibly have—" "But I do, Darius," I said, my voice calm and even. "And unless you release my grandson and agree to my terms, I will make sure that this information finds its way into the hands of every law enforcement agency and media outlet in the country." He sat back in his chair, his eyes flashing with rage and desperation. "And what are your terms, Harris? What do you want from me?" I leaned forward, my gaze boring into his with an intensity that could melt steel. "I want you to let Jake go, Darius. I want you to release him from whatever hold you have over him, to wipe out his debts and his obligations. And I want you to swear on your life and your honor that you will never come near him or my family again." There was a long moment of tense silence, a battle of wills that crackled like electricity in the air between us. And then, finally, he nodded, a gesture of surrender and defeat that spoke volumes about the power I held over him. "Very well, Harris," he said, his voice bitter and resigned. "You have a deal. Your grandson will be released, and I will abide by your terms. But mark my words, old man, this is not over between us. Not by a long shot." I smiled, a cold and triumphant thing that lit up my face like a beacon. "Oh, I know, Darius. I know that this is just the beginning. But for now, I will take my victory and my grandson, and I will leave you to your schemes and your machinations." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my head held high, and my heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt. I had won this battle, had secured the safety and the future of the one I loved most in this world. But I knew that the war was far from over, that there would be other battles to come and other enemies to face. And I knew that I would need all my strength and all my cunning to see us through to the other side. For I was Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who had stared down the face of evil and emerged unbroken and unafraid. And I would not rest until I had made the world a safer and better place for the ones I loved, until I had fulfilled the sacred duty that had always been my highest calling and my deepest purpose. With a final nod of satisfaction, I stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the same unwavering courage and unshakable resolve that had always been my guiding light and my North Star. For the mission was far from over, and there was still work to be done. But for now, I could savor the taste of victory, the knowledge that I had protected what mattered most and upheld the values that had always defined me. And that, in the end, was enough. More than enough to fill my heart with pride and my soul with peace, and to light the way forward into a brighter and better future for us all. The days that followed were a time of healing and reflection, of picking up the pieces and finding a way forward in the wake of the storm that had nearly torn us apart. Jake was released from Darius's clutches, battered and bruised, but alive. His eyes haunted by the horrors he had seen and the mistakes he had made. I took him into my home, into the warmth and safety of the life I had built, and I set about the long and difficult process of helping him to heal, to find his way back to the person he had once been. It was a daunting task, a challenge that would test every ounce of my strength and my patience. But I was determined to see it through, to be the rock and the anchor that he so desperately needed. We talked for hours on end, sharing our fears and our hopes, our regrets and our dreams for the future. I listened as he poured out his heart, as he spoke of the shame and the guilt that had driven him to such desperate lengths, and I offered him the wisdom and the guidance that only a lifetime of experience could provide. And slowly but surely, I began to see a change in him, a glimmer of the old Jake emerging from the shadows of his pain and his trauma. He started to smile again, to laugh, and to joke in the way that had always been his trademark. And I felt a rush of pride and joy at the sight, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, we had turned a corner and found a way back to the light. But even as we savored these moments of peace and healing, I knew that the danger was far from over, that the forces that had sought to destroy us were still out there, waiting and watching for their chance to strike again. And I knew that I would have to be vigilant, that I would have to use every trick and every tactic in my arsenal to keep my family safe and secure. And so, I set about the task of fortifying our defenses, of building a wall of protection around the ones I loved that would withstand any assault and any attack. I called in more favors, more contacts, and more resources, assembling a team of experts and operatives who could help me to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. There was Maria, the former CIA agent who had once saved my life in the jungles of Colombia, and John, the brilliant young lawyer who had a mind like a steel trap and a heart of pure gold. There was Rachel, the tough-as-nails journalist, who had a nose for the truth and a fearless determination to uncover it, and David, the tech genius who could hack into any system and unravel any mystery. Together, we formed a tight-knit unit, a band of brothers and sisters, united by a common purpose and a shared resolve. We pooled our knowledge and our skills, our contacts and our resources, and we set about the task of taking the fight to the enemy, of rooting out the corruption and the evil that had threatened to destroy us all. It was a long and grueling campaign, a battle that tested us to the very limits of our endurance and our courage. We faced danger and adversity at every turn, from the back alleys of the city to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. But we never wavered, never faltered in our determination to see justice done, and the innocent protected. And through it all, I was there, the steady hand at the helm, the unwavering voice of reason and resolve that guided us through the storm and into the calm waters beyond. I used every trick and every tactic I had learned in my long and storied career, from the art of diplomacy to the science of warfare, and I poured my heart and my soul into the fight, knowing that the stakes could not be higher or the cost more dear. And in the end, we emerged victorious, the forces of darkness and deceit vanquished, and the light of truth and justice shining bright once more. Darius and his empire were brought to their knees, his secrets and his lies exposed for all the world to see, and the streets of our city were made safe and free once more. But even as we celebrated our triumph, even as we savored the sweet taste of victory and vindication, I knew that the work was far from over, that there would always be new battles to fight and new enemies to face. And I knew that I would have to be ready, that I would have to keep my sword sharp and my shield strong, to defend the ones I loved and the values I held dear. For I was Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who had faced the darkness and emerged unbroken and unafraid. And I knew that my mission, my purpose, my very reason for being, was to stand watch on the walls of freedom, to be the guardian and the protector of all that was good and right and true in this world. And so, as I looked out over the city that I had sworn to defend, as I felt the warm embrace of my family and the deep bonds of loyalty and love that tied us together, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. For this was my calling, my sacred duty, the very essence of who I was and what I stood for. And as long as there was breath in my body and fire in my soul, I would never stop fighting, never stop striving, never stop giving everything I had to make the world a better and brighter place. With a final nod of satisfaction and a heart full of hope and determination, I turned to face the future, ready to meet whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead, with the same unwavering courage and unshakable resolve that had always been my guiding light and my North Star. For the mission was far from over and there was still work to be done. But I knew that I was ready, that I had the strength and the wisdom and the love to see us through to the other side, to build a legacy of honor and integrity that would endure long after I was gone. And that, in the end, was enough. More than enough to fill my days with purpose and my nights with peace, and to light the way forward into a future that was brought with promise and alive with possibility. The years that followed were a time of growth and renewal, of rebuilding the bonds of love and trust that had been so badly frayed by the trials we had endured. Jake and I grew closer than ever, the shared experience of our ordeal forging a bond between us that was stronger than steel and more precious than gold. He became my partner and my protege, the one who would carry on my legacy and my values long after I was gone. Together, we worked to build a new life, a new future, one that was based on the principles of honor and integrity, of service and sacrifice to something greater than ourselves. Jake enrolled in college, studying law and politics with a passion and a determination that filled my heart with pride. He threw himself into his studies, his mind and his spirit alive with the thrill of learning and discovery. And I watched with amazement as he grew and matured before my very eyes, becoming the man I had always known he could be. And as he flourished and thrived, as he found his place in the world and his purpose in life, I knew that all the pain and the heartache, all the struggles and the sacrifices had been worth it in the end. For I had given him the greatest gift of all, the gift of a second chance, a new beginning. And he had seized it with both hands and run with it, never looking back. But even as I reveled in his success and his happiness, even as I savored the joy and the fulfillment of seeing my grandson become the man he was meant to be, I knew that my own journey was far from over, that there were still battles to be fought and challenges to be met. For the world was a dangerous and uncertain place, full of threats and perils that could strike at any moment. And I knew that I would have to be ready, that I would have to use all my skills and all my experience to keep the ones I loved safe and secure. And so, I threw myself into my own work, into the task of building a better and brighter future for us all. I became more involved in my community, in the causes and the organizations that were working to make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. I volunteered at the local Veterans Center, sharing my experiences and my wisdom with the young men and women who had followed in my footsteps, helping them to find their way in a world that could be confusing and overwhelming at times. And I worked with law enforcement and government agencies, using my contacts and my expertise to root out corruption and bring those who would prey on the innocent to justice. It was a challenging and rewarding time, a chapter of my life that was full of purpose and meaning, of the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that you are making a difference in the world. And through it all, I had the love and the support of my family, of the people who meant everything to me and who gave my life its deepest and most abiding sense of joy. Samantha and I grew closer as well. The shared experience of almost losing Jake, bringing us together in a way that we had never been before. We learned to communicate and to understand each other, to see beyond the surface differences that had once divided us, and to find the common ground that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. And as we worked to rebuild our relationship, to create a new and stronger bond based on mutual respect and understanding, I began to see her in a new light, to appreciate the strength and the resilience that had always been hidden beneath her brittle exterior. She became a true partner and a true friend, someone I could rely on and confide in, someone who understood the challenges and the joys of the life we had chosen. Together, we watched as our family grew and flourished, as Jake and his new wife welcomed their first dild into the world, a beautiful baby girl with my son's eyes and Samantha's smile. And as I held that precious bundle in my arms, as I felt the warmth and the weight of new life against my chest, I knew that I had been given the greatest gift of all, the gift of a legacy that would endure long after I was gone. For this was what it was all about, in the end. Not the money or the power, not the accolades or the awards, but the love and the connection that we shared with the people who mattered most. The bonds of family and friendship that sustained us through the darkest of times and lifted us up to the brightest of HGTs. And as I looked around at the faces of those I held most dear, at the love and the laughter that filled every corner of my life, I knew that I had found the true meaning and purpose of my existence, the reason I had been put on this earth in the first place. To love and to be loved, to serve and to protect, to leave the world a little better than I had found it. That was the measure of a life well lived, the only legacy that really mattered in the end. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a soul full of peace, I embraced the future that lay ahead, knowing that whatever challenges and adventures it might bring, I would face them with the same courage and determination that had always been my guiding light. For I was Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who had learned to find the strength and the beauty in the midst of the chaos and the pain. And as long as I had the love and the support of those who mattered most, as long as I had the fire and the passion that had always driven me forward, I knew that there was nothing I could not overcome, no obstacle I could not conquer. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all, the most precious treasure that any man could ever hope to possess. The knowledge that I had lived a life that mattered, that I had made a difference in the world and in the hearts of those I loved. And so, with a final smile and a heart full of joy, I turned my face towards the sun, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with open arms and an open heart. For the best was yet to come, and I was ready to meet it head on, with all the strength and all the love that I had to give. It's been 10 years since that fateful day when I confronted Darius and won my grandson's freedom. 10 years since I embarked on the journey of healing and renewal that would change the course of my life forever. And as I sit here in the warm glow of a summer evening, surrounded by the laughter and the love of my family and friends, I can't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude and wonder for the incredible adventure that has been my life. Oh, it hasn't always been easy. There have been plenty of challenges and setbacks along the way. Plenty of moments when the old doubts and fears threatened to creep back in. But through it all, I have held fast to the lessons I learned in those darkest of days, to the truths that were forged in the fire of adversity and pain. I have learned that family is the most precious gift we are given, and that it is up to us to cherish and protect it with all that we have. I have learned that love is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of healing even the deepest wounds and bridging even the widest divides. And I have learned that true strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. These are the lessons that I have tried to pass on to my dildren and grandchildren, the values and the principles that I hope will guide them through the trials and triumphs of their own lives. And as I watch them grow and thrive, as I see the love and the light shining in their eyes, I know that my work has not been in vain. For they are my legacy, my greatest achievement, and my deepest joy. They are the proof that one man's love and courage can change the world, that the seeds of hope and compassion planted in the hearts of the young can bloom into a garden of beauty and wonder. And so, as the sun begins to set on another perfect day, as the fireflies dance and the crickets sing their evening song, I close my eyes and offer up a silent prayer of thanks for all that I have been given, for all that I have been able to give in return. For I am Franklin Harris, a soldier, a father, a man who has lived a life of purpose and meaning, a life that has made a difference in the world and in the hearts of those I hold most dear. And as long as there is breath in my body and love in my soul, I will continue to do just that, to live each day with courage and conviction, with gratitude and grace. For that is the only way to truly live, the only way to leave a mark on this world that will endure long after we are gone. And it is a mark that I am proud to leave, a legacy of love and wisdom that will shine like a beacon through the ages, guiding all those who follow in my footsteps towards a brighter and more beautiful future. So let us go forth with joy and with hope, with the strength and the courage of those who have gone before us. And let us never, ever forget the power of love to heal all and to transform, to lift us up and to set us free. For that is the greatest lesson of all, the one that I will carry with me until the very end of my days. And it is a lesson that I leave to you, my beloved family, as the most precious gift I have to give. Cherish it always, and let it be your guiding light through all the days of your lives. For it is the light of love, and it will never, ever fade away. If you found Franklin's story of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting tales of everyday heroes making a difference in the world. And don't forget to share your own experiences and reflections in the comments below. We all have a story to tell, a lesson to learn, a legacy to leave. By sharing our journeys and our truths, we inspire and uplift each other, and we create a world that is a little brighter, a little more beautiful, a little more full of hope and possibility. So, keep shining your light, my friends. Keep loving and serving. Keep fighting for what is right and true. The world needs more heroes like Franklin Harris, more everyday champions of integrity and honor. And together, we can build a future that is worthy of our highest ideals, our deepest dreams. One story at a time, one act of courage at a time. The journey begins anew, with each and every one of us. So let us go forth with strength and with faith, with the wisdom and the grace of those who have gone before us. For the best is yet to come, and the light of love will guide us every step of the way.